Teaching Blast technical seminars are an Intertech production. For instructor-led .NET, Java, and XML courses, visit us at www.intertech.com.
Now the code behind feature, which is included with ASP.NET, is actually compiled code that you would write typically in C# or VB, and that's going to handle all of your event handlers and any other custom code that any web page might actually need. Note that this code behind file, and that's what we like to refer to it as, is a nice separation from the actual UI. In classic ASP, for example, we had this thing called spaghetti code. Well, that's what everybody called it, really, because your logic was intertwined and intermixed like spaghetti with the actual presentation. So presentation logic as well as business logic and the presentation controls were all intertwined into one messy file, and it was a nightmare to maintain. And if you ever got put onto a project that somebody had already created for you, it was almost impossible to learn what they were actually doing. With ASP.NET, they wanted to move that into a separate file, and that's what they did. So all of your C# or VB code can be in a code behind file. Meanwhile, your .aspx file itself could actually contain just the controls and just the markup in JavaScript that you want to send to the actual client, as well as some style. ASP.NET Web Controls, mind you, are actually these controls that exist in the toolbox within Visual Studio that'll generate the HTML and JavaScript for us automatically, and I'll demonstrate those controls for us. Now in the web world, remember, we can only store state in two different areas, the client side and on the server side. Mind you, on the client side, we don't trust anything that's going on in their browser, right? Because as soon as you give some source code, some HTML and JavaScript to the client, that's no longer your source code. That's theirs. They can do whatever they want with it. They can change your cookies, they can change your HTML, they can change your JavaScript in their web browser and actually load it up in their browser and point it back to your server to see what your server does. Right? They have full control over that source code, so we have to be careful when we store information on the client side. On the server side, however, hey, we've got better technologies here. First off, we have a real language, not just JavaScript, but on the server side, we have C# or VB. We've also got access to server resources, such as access to maybe web services or to our database, for example, our databases that we might have on the server side. And we have security. Any source code that's stored on the server side, users don't have access to it, they can't manipulate it, they can't see what we're doing. We have security on the server side, unless we've been hacked, of course. Now, web applications in ASP.NET are completely object-oriented. That's hugely advantageous. We love the fact that everything's object-oriented, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel for every single page. Every one of the ASPX web pages, if you will, inherits from a class called page. And this page class gives us a lot of the classic events we're used to working with in ASP.NET, and we can handle those events if we choose. Alternatively, we don't need to. ASP.NET also makes use of configuration files, just like other forms of .NET applications. In the ASP.NET world, we have a file called web.config. And of course, the config files are actually just XML files. Of course, we know that they are strongly typed and that they are case sensitive and space sensitive. We have to be extremely cautious when we're editing our XML files. Now, these config files are very delicate. I mean, if you literally add a space to an attribute value, .NET won't understand it. So we have to be very careful when we're editing this file. Usually we want to use a custom tool like either ASphere, that's a free tool you can download off the internet, or maybe you want to use the website administration tool, which is available right from Visual Studio, or on a production server you could even use IIS itself. IIS 5.1, the version that comes with Windows XP even, for example, has the ability to go ahead and edit our web.config files. And these configuration files actually have a level of inheritance and polymorphism, if you will. For example, there is one Uber configuration file that all .NET applications inherit their settings from, and that, of course, is machine.config. Let me switch over there real quickly. Here we can see I'm in the folder location where .NET's actually installed on our machines. Here we can see that I'm looking at the Windows folder, Microsoft.NET, and you can see that I have a folder called Framework. And inside of here are the 6 different versions of .NET that Microsoft has officially released. Note that Just talking about versions of .NET, you'll notice that 3.0 and 3.5 are not full versions of .NET, and that's why they don't have a full version number. Instead, with those versions of .NET, they just tacked on a few extra libraries, or maybe a new version of the compiler with 3.5, and they called it a new version of the framework. Version 4.0, though, was a new version of .NET when they released this. And if I navigate in here, I am going to find a folder called config. Once I'm inside of here, I'm going to find this special file called machine.config. Every .NET application that's running on my system with the .NET 4.0 framework inherits settings from this particular parent config file. Inheriting from this guy is another file we like to call the root level web.config file. He's actually inheriting settings from machine.config, and he's adding additional settings. Now, likewise, default website that might be running on IIS, for example, it might have its own web.config file and choose to overwrite some of these. And then a virtual directory can have its web.config file, again, choosing to add additional settings or possibly override or clear out some of the settings that normally be inheriting. That's why we like to say it's polymorphism. It's kind of cascading as well. If you've worked with CSS files, for example, settings might be in an outside CSS file, but you can override some of the styles up in the head section of your page, or the individual control can again override that. So with these config files, which are just XML, and if I double click this guy, we can actually see the contents of it. You can see that it is XML, and we have to be very careful. We have to be cautious when we're editing this file, because if we screw something up, for example, .NET's not going to work correctly, or .NET will ignore your setting completely. We don't like to see that. Come back into the slide here. Note that the website administration tool, which is available from Visual Studio, can be launched right off the web drop-down menu or in your actual project. And I'll show you that shortly here. Now, Visual Studio itself does include server-side and client-side debugging, so we can go ahead and debug our C# or our VB code running on the server side, as well as the JavaScript that might be running on the client side. Although you always have the option, right? For example, if you prefer to use Firebug with Mozilla Firefox, perhaps for doing your JavaScript debugging, that's cool. Or if you want to use maybe the developer tools that are built into IE, starting with IE 8. Or if you have IE 7, you can download the special developer toolbar. We've also got breakpoints, we have full IntelliSense, and web project management. Now, ASP.NET itself does include several tools making life easier for us as web developers, especially when it comes to content. We like to follow the DRY rule, D-R-Y. That means don't repeat yourself. You hear this all the time, especially in, you listen to anybody talk about MVC, for example. That's one of the rules they especially follow, but so does ASP.NET Forms, for example. Like user controls. User controls are actually a portion of the web page that can be used across multiple pages. We love content reuse. We hate duplicate code, right? Duplicate code is a nightmare when somebody comes up to you and asks you to change one of those guys. Oh, we need to have this one user control, for example, have this update to it. Well, now you're going to have to apply it to all the copies of that. You know, we wouldn't want to have to do that. We don't like duplicate code because we're human beings, and chances are good we're going to skip one of them. We're going to accidentally miss one. Master pages were introduced with .NET 2.0, and again, if you come take the course at Intertech for this, we'll talk about different ways of doing master pages. For example, we can even do nested master pages. Master pages are a way of defining the whole outer level of your entire site, such as your navigation, your header, your footer, and then using these special content placeholders in the actual page that the ASPX will be responsible for populating. They are the opposite of user controls, because user controls are just a portion of the page, whereas a master page is the primary most of the page. It's like taking a user control and turning it inside out. Themes and skins are also something that's very important. For example, working with skin files, we can actually define the markup and set public properties of our web controls, something we can't do in CSS. For example, cascading style sheets allows a great way of setting the different style attributes of any of the normal HTML controls, and that's fantastic. And you can continue to use CSS with ASP.NET. Themes and skins, however, also allow you to set other public properties that you can't access from CSS. For example, setting the image URL off of an image control, or some of the other public properties that you have available to you off of the normal web controls that come along in the toolbox. Web parts allow you to personalize a site, creating a portal site, if you will. And web parts were included with .NET 2.0 and newer, and something you may have worked on if you've ever had your own SharePoint site, for example, or maybe you've done some SharePoint development. Web parts are another way of doing composite controls, but the best part is when the user closes their browser, even blows away their cookies, and once they log in again, we still have all those personalization settings. We personalize the site to them. So whatever web parts they originally wanted to display, they're still there.
For more free learning resources and to see the latest lineup of our instructor-led .NET, Java, and XML courses, visit us at www.intertech.com.